Nice to be with you together on this Wednesday evening. I know probably a lot of you spent the day at work or doing some sort of job. So just want to invite you to kind of allow your mind and your body to kind of make that transition away from just letting go of whatever you were doing during the day and whatever occupied your mind and your activities, and just see this as just this sort of hour and a half kind of special time where we just let go of the day. Just letting it go. And a couple of good exhales from down here, down deep. Just letting any kind of felt sort of stress, just inviting it to just fall away with the out-breath. If it doesn't want to fall away, that's okay too. But we can at least invite ourselves to let whatever might kind of keep us from being fully present here with one another, to just acknowledge it and just let it pass. And here we are. Here we are. So our whole intention here to start with is meeting the moment in a fresh way. And as I just said, one of the requirements of that, it's relatively straightforward, is just letting go of what's actually not occurring in the moment. It's a great way to get yourself more resourced into the moment, is just to notice if your mind is occupied with something that's not actually happening right now. Probably with something that you can't even do anything about right now. So just noticing how our mind can be involved in activity that not only is it not necessarily useful, but it keeps us from being really present. I've thought about this, about even the words to be present. They're used so much. That doesn't mean they're not good words and good sort of pointers. But I've noticed as a teacher, but over the years, of once a sort of way of articulating or speaking about something becomes ingrained in people's consciousness, and any of us, we kind of stop listening in a certain sense, because there's a part of our brain that kind of goes, yeah, I know what that is. I've been there. I've heard about it. I've done it. Not that we say that to ourselves. Sometimes we might. But even if we're not saying something that in an obvious way, at a deep, almost unconscious way, we do listen. And not only listen, but I mean we meet the moment in a very different way when what we're occupied in that moment is only what's occurring in that moment. And I don't mean that's the only way to be at all times in life. There's a moment, there's a time to think about the future and plan and things like that. But here, and probably the vast majority of time when our mind is wandering into the future or stumbling along over the past, it's happening. We're not necessarily often choosing to do it. It's not particularly productive for us, but it's just it's often two things. There's one that's a kind of ingrained habit of going over things that are long since gone, or ruminating about things that might yet happen. So that can be a kind of habit that we can get into, or we can think that that's going to it's a kind of a grasp for a kind of control, which that often doesn't work as well as we imagine it does either, right? So being in the moment is, we do have this kind of cliche notion of what that might be in our minds, and I include myself in this right along with you because I'm a teacher. I use words all the time. I listen to words, I hear words, I read words, I write words. And so I have to be careful. I have to be careful that when I'm either taking in words, reading, listening, or when I'm speaking words, that in both of those situations, I try to kind of consciously come at that moment as in a fresh way as I can. So if I'm taking something in, I can actually learn something new instead of filtering it through, well, in my case, 60 years of life experience. That life experience is great to draw upon, but I don't want to be filtering every moment of my life through the 60 years of filter creating. I don't think any of us want to do that. So sometimes we do have to bring a little intention to things, even something as simple, just so simple as like, hey, let's start by trying to be in the moment. Let's be in the moment. And we all assume that we know what that is, and so we don't really listen at all. But I found that one of the things, it's a little trick that I'll use inside myself is sometimes to sort of prompt my mind if I'm going to be listening or reading something. I'll prompt my mind and almost try to tell my mind almost like, okay, we're going to pretend that you don't have this other reservoir of knowledge that you've gained, so that when you're listening to this or reading this, that you can actually be encountering it in such a way that it's brand new for you, right? Because, of course, it is new. If I'm listening to somebody speak or I'm reading something, it's probably going to be brand new. But that doesn't mean our mind interacts with it as if it's new, right? Because, like I said, we have all the words we're using, or we've long since learned them, and we use them, and they're familiar with us, and we hear them using, especially if they're used in familiar ways, we kind of start going a little bit to sleep. I've seen as a teacher when I can use words, but if I use them in an unfamiliar way, people start to pay attention. Like, hey, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like the old familiar way he's using that particular whatever phrase or concept or something. And then we pay attention because it puts people back in that, hey, what does he mean? Back in the unknown, right? Back in the kind of an innocent, curious place. And that innocent, curious sort of space of being, that's the being that sort of just allows us to enter in really into the moment as it is. And the moment is it doesn't always feel extraordinary as it is, but certainly in our deeper moments of realization, we realize that the moment, any moment, as it is that was the thing that was extraordinary all along, right? That's why so many of us sort of laughingly scratch our heads for a little while, wondering, how did I miss this? How did I miss this deeper reality when it's not hidden? How do you miss something that's right in plain view? And the answer is pretty darn easily. It's pretty easy to miss the deeper aspects of any moment, of yourself even, or of somebody else. Right? As soon as we enter into a moment, consciously or unconsciously, assuming that we pretty much know most of everything there is to know about that moment, we're not really there in a full way, right? It's like if you're with somebody and you've been, let's say, me and Mukti and I have been married 27 and a half years. We've known each other a little over 30 years. And when you know somebody that long, when you're married to somebody that long or longer, you know that you can, if you want to, you can predict a lot of their reactions and behaviors and ways of being, and you can do all that with a fair amount of accuracy. Not great accuracy, because fortunately, people aren't quite as predictable as we may imagine they are. But nonetheless, when you're with somebody or with a good friend or somebody, you can predict a lot about them before you're even in this particular situation with them. And therein lies the challenge, whether it's a long-term friendship or marriage or relationship of some kind. When your mind decides at some level, kind of like, I kind of know this person because I can predict their behavior, I know how they'll answer the majority of questions they're asked, so it goes, we can stop paying attention. And when we stop paying attention, then the other person starts to seem a little boring to us. But usually what's boring is our attention, our lack of attention is what's actually boring, not the other person. That we've just allowed our attention to become unfocused, without real energy and curiosity and interest, right? Like if you're meeting somebody new for the first time. You ever notice how much of yourself comes to the fore when you're meeting somebody or getting to know somebody? Even just a casual encounter with a stranger and you strike up a conversation. Think of how much you're bringing to that moment. Like how much is sort of on alert and your energy's there and your awareness is a little, it's almost a little hyper focused. And then if it's somebody you know really, really well, it feels different. Part of that we like, right? Part of that relaxation, that ability just to, relax in someone's presence is always nice. I've jokingly said to friends over the years, I even used to say it to Mukti earlier. I used to say, well, before I was married, my idea of dating was to get over the dating phase as fast as humanly possible so we could get into the hanging out phase. I always love the parts where you start to just, hang out. You do things together, you go places, but you're more sort of hanging out because that's where I always felt like, okay, now we're really getting to know each other, right? That's the place in which we get to know each other. And there's a sort of relaxation around that. And when we relax in each other's presence, that's a wonderful thing. Everybody likes to, be relaxed when they're with somebody and you have a nice conversation flowing or whatever's happening. But have you ever, we can be relaxed, but really vivid and present, right? With our heart present and our mind available and we're really there. Or we can be really relaxed in a very, a comfortable, known environment with somebody we know. And we can kind of like be half there, right? Our consciousness is kind of, it's not really turned brightly on because we assume at some unconscious level everything is known. And so we're not quite as vibrant. And that can become almost a lifestyle because, you live in a place for a while, you know that well enough. You're not, excited about like every nook and corner of your house or your apartment or wherever you live after you live there for a while. And your car, you have that. And so it goes, right? And so there's this familiarity. And we've all been familiar with this thing called life, however many years we've been on the planet. Of course, there's new things happening almost with every breath, but nonetheless, we've been around for a little while. So all these things can kind of make not just us sort of relax, but a consciousness kind of dim a little bit. Kind of dim. Now, it's like I've heard lots and lots of stories. Most people, I would say, have some sort of their deep spiritual shifts often follow a certain pattern where often they get into a part of their life that's more challenging than it has been, or maybe more tumultuous. Who knows what's happened or come up from them. But something's stirring, something's making it difficult enough to where you start to pay attention, like, hey, what's going on? Things aren't flowing, I'm not quite as happy or carefree, or that kind of energy of some amount of dissatisfaction is often the compelling thrust or energy that motivates someone's spiritual search. And so many, many spiritual big shifts will happen, in this sort of more intensified version of spirituality when we suddenly realize, I have to pay attention. Maybe some kind of suffering got our attention or something, and we realize that something inside of us very deeply, something needs to be addressed, right? And so our spiritual search can be born out of that sort of discomfort. And on the positive side, a kind of intuitive feeling that there's something right there. There's something that perhaps I'm not seeing that may be important to me. The reason I bring this up is because when all these things I've just mentioned, when we have some a little more conflict or some turmoil or something starts to occur inside of us or occur in our life that's a dissatisfaction, as I said, that often prompts a spiritual search. That dissatisfaction, though, what it really does is it heightens our awareness, right? We start paying attention, like something's a little out of joint, something's not working right. I don't feel quite right. Whatever the symptom that we feel is. And that brings us, we start paying attention more. So it's not necessarily that, say, some life crisis leads to spiritual awakening. Obviously, most crises for most people don't lead to spiritual awakening. They can, but it's not like it happens every time, we go into a personal crisis. Wouldn't that be cool if it did work that way? But alas, it's not quite that way. But this heightening of our consciousness, or heightening of our awareness, this way in which we're kind of leaning into the moment, right? Leaning into the moment, leaning into life. Not like leaning into trying to get everything you can out of it and squeeze as much experience, and that becomes the experience junkie's version of being in the moment, trying to make every experience bigger and better as you possibly can. That's not it either, right? So there's those personality types that are trying to squeeze everything they can out of the moment, the ego just squeezing as much desire as it can. And then there's almost like its opposite, which is that kind of personality that's not quite sure that it wants to join the moment, and it may have its reasons that, at least according to it, seem pretty reasonable. They make sense. Why one would have some ambiguity about fully diving into the moment. And yet, that's the heart of spirituality. So see, what I'm trying to convey here is being present. It may be as simple as we think, but it's certainly a lot deeper than we think. To really be present. To really be present. And what are we being present with? That's an important issue too. And this goes for being present, walking down the hallway, doing work around the house, going to the job, driving your car, or meditating, doing spiritual inquiry. All those things. All those things really require a certain degree of presence, of being somewhat present. But when so the presence I'm talking about isn't like an exclusive being present in the moment. There's no special moment that's better equipped to be present in it than any other moment. Any moment will do. And as I said, what are we being present with? We often, I think, when we're being present, we're often being present in this sort of kind of heady way where our attention might be on something. We think it's about focusing even more of our attention on something, so our attention just isn't wandering. And we think that's what being in the present moment is. And that's like the first thing. It's like if you're going to open the door, the first thing you have to do is to actually put your hand on the doorknob so you can turn it and open it. So when we're talking about being in the present moment, this way that we're trying to bring our even more aware of the present, yes, that's the beginning. That's not the end, though. That's like getting your hand on the doorknob. You haven't even opened the door yet, nor twisted it. But that's a good first step. But for most people, that's the only step they really know, is just trying to bring more awareness into the moment. And that's a good thing. That has lots and lots and lots of benefits. But there can be a deeper version of that, or just a little bit, yeah, a deeper version of that. What is it? So when we look at, and we get to the deeper version, when we start to notice, what am I being present with? What's being present? And what's the quality of me being present? And we often see, I'm being present with this kind of heady awareness often, right? Like a spotlight. I'm just noticing things. Okay, nice start. What if you now involve this whole area we might call the chest? What if it's like to be aware more from here? So you see the moment. Can you feel it? What's it like to really be present in your feeling body? I don't necessarily mean in your emotionality. There can be emotion, but it's a little deeper than that. And that deep, we almost need a different word that's deeper than feeling and deeper than emotion. We don't have a word that quite gets to what I want to express, but but to get the feel of something, right? The feel of it. Like you and I can hold this cup up and I can say, okay, we're all going to look at the cup for 3 seconds. Okay, great. We just looked at the cup for 3 seconds. Now let me turn it around. And there's a little symbol on it. Can you see that symbol? A little sun, almost like. Well, look at it. Let's see how that makes you feel that. Can you feel that symbol? There's no right way that it feels in you. There's just whatever it evokes in you. Just that little sunshiny thing. What does that evoke? So now we're not just looking at it, right? We're not just looking at it. We're like, oh, we're seeing where there's like a relationship happening, right? So it's evoking something different. Now maybe we have a feel for it. There's this sun design on the cup, and we can just look at that, or we can sense that, and we can feel that. And I'm not just talking with cups, but with trees, with the environment, with rooms, the space in a room, the environment in a room. The presence of a room. Every room has a very discernible presence in it. If you're sensitive, you'll feel it. Quite strongly sometimes, going from different rooms, different houses, different locations, different spaces have a very different sort of feeling tone. There's a presence, a kind of quality of consciousness that sort of seems to hover around in the space or something like that. And then it's okay, now we're starting to feel something. If we can even get a little more present, then we start to not just feel how we're like personally interacting with, say, an image or whatever it is, but now we go to that deeper level. And maybe at that deeper level, we start to get just maybe little hints of a kind of connection with whatever we're present with. There's something, and that's where people try to figure it out. As soon as they feel any of it, they think, is this oneness? And they go upstairs and they're trying to figure it out and think, is this the right thing? And da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And they're lost. They might as well be watching TV. So if you start to feel any kind of little bit of a connection with things in your environment, don't think about it. Don't even ask, is this it? Or is this what I'm just talking about? Just kind of go with it and see where it leads you. Well, you can ask those questions later. Just kind of go with it. So there's that feeling tone of a kind of connectedness. It may start as almost something a little odd. You just feel a little more connected with things in your environment than usual. You're not quite sure what it is, but it just feels a little bit different, right? And then maybe we're so present that we don't just have a sort of vague feeling of connection. All of a sudden there's kind of this, we can get realization states to come in, right? We can start to feel, and not just feel, but actually know, like, wow, the environment, and there's something about us that's the same. Even though everything looks different and everyone looks different, there's something the same, and you can feel it, and there's a connectedness, and there's a felt sense of unity. Okay, I could keep going. We'll stop there for a moment. All that's what it means to be present. Or at least that's a possibility when we're being present. It can be present kind of through here, kind of be present here. Have you ever tried to be present in the belly? Like, oh, what does that feel like from the belly? And like I say, you should have fun with this stuff. Experiment with this stuff. Don't take it overly seriously. Don't start to think, now what I have to do is do this presence thing and realize oneness, and you just come up with this whole agenda that just ruins it because that's all ego stuff. Instead, have a little curiosity. Try to reconnect with that little less anxious, little younger version of yourself where you can just look out the window and just look out there and go, okay, I'm going to look out there and really just from my eyes. That's where we look out, from my eyes. Oh, what if I include the feeling of my heart when I look? What might that be like? What if I'm looking out there and I kind of in some way incorporate my gut as if my eyes are in my gut? Now, your eyes aren't going to drop down to your gut, but it's just the feeling of what if because you can take in information in different parts of your body. Visual, auditory, often, obviously. There's the senses. We know our senses, but the subtle senses is what I'm really talking about. And so you just look out, let's say, oh, how does that tree look? How does it look when I look at it from my eyes? How is it when I incorporate my heart? How is it when I get down here in the belly of things and look at it there too? How is it when I look from all at once? See, and then you're not trying to get it perfect or right, or you're not getting it too fancy. You're kind of experimenting, you're playing, you're noticing how literally your experience of a given moment or a given day is almost entirely dependent on where you're perceiving from. And that's a pretty cool thing to know. And you can change an immense amount about how you experience and how you feel about that moment by looking at where you're looking at the moment from, right? From. And maybe just you wake up, on the bad side of the universe one day and you're doing this and it just doesn't seem to be easy and you don't seem to be able to be in the present moment that much, and it all seems quite difficult and confusing. But that then is that present moment. Can I enter into that moment with all of its uncomfortability, right? But with that kind of curiosity. Well, can that sort of feeling of being lost or unconnected or anxious, or what's that like when I am present with that? How is that when I see it just from my intellect? How is that when I see it from my heart? How is that when I include the belly? How is that when you know what I mean? So even if it's not working at all on some given day, some days it's just rough days, you're having it, and just the spiritual little tricks of the trade just don't work very well. There's days like that. But even on a day like that, that's what's happening in your present moment. And that can change given the quality of how you meet that present moment, your own presence. So, I hope you get a sense that even something so simple that we've all heard probably thousands of times, about the present moment and being mindful and these kind of teachings, and they seem so simple, and we think being present is just paying a little more attention than usual, and like I said, that's where it starts. But that's like just barely getting your hand on a doorknob that you want to twist and open and see what's in the other side of the room. It's just the beginning. And so a lot of these teachings that can seem pretty kind of simplistic, often what's simplistic about them is not the teaching, it's actually our approach to them. It's one of the things I learned. It took me a while to learn this as a student, too. It took me quite a while, but I eventually kind of came to it on my own. I kind of learned it. which was the greatest part of any teaching is going to be what I bring to it. How present am I? Right? What am I bringing to the table when I engage in it? What's my mind state when I consume or take in a spiritual teaching, right? Is it this anxious, like we would call in Buddhism, a hungry ghost? And we've all had times where we felt like hungry ghosts. And a hungry ghost is it's the image of it is like a ghost, say, with their mouth wide open, and it's just being poured in, whatever it wants. It's just being poured in continuously. But its stomach is like open on the bottom, so everything just falls right out. So the ghost is endlessly hungry, endlessly desiring, but it can't contain, it can't hold anything. So all it can do is, it's in an endless search. We know what it's like to be on an endless search, or to, just like nothing will fill you up, because when nothing seems to fill you up, that means you're trying to fill yourself up on the wrong things, right? And that's how life is. Sometimes something really fills you, an activity or something. It fills you up, makes you feel good, makes you feel vibrant, makes you feel alive. But maybe 5 years later, 10 years or 20 years or however long, that same activity might not be so vibrant. Maybe it's just run its course. And also maybe you're just not as present in the same way that you used to be, right? So I've always liked certain teachings that seem overly simplistic until you kind of crack them open. And once you crack them open, you realize, well, pretty much every other teaching in the entire universe that's useful, spiritually speaking, is in this one little teaching. They could all be seen to come out of something as simple as being present. If you're not being present, forget all the other spiritual teachings. They ain't going to work. Because being present is the groundwork of any of them. Whether you're meditating, or you're chanting, or you're singing, or you're whatever we're doing, spiritually thinking, we have to bring ourselves to each moment. And it feels good when we do it. It feels good to be connected to the moment. Be connected. And maybe lastly, I'll go into some questions here, some of your emails that you sent, but start by being present to external things. Spirituality is kind of this weird thing. Like everything else, its strength is its weakness, and its weakness is its strength. So the strength of most forms of mystical or spirituality that has anything to do with real awakening, they're very inwardly focused in general. Very, very inwardly focused, right? And that's a necessity, because we are so damn outwardly focused. We're outwardly focused, but not just outwardly focused. We're outwardly focused, in all things out here. But when we do go inward, what we're focused on inwardly is our endless narrative. So that's our kind of association for a lot of people, especially if they're kind of new to this, is, when you go inward, there's your narrative, there's your story, there's, your gripe with whoever or whatever. That's not really going inward in a spiritual sense. That may be the sort of the first doorway we kind of go through, right, is the narrative. But if we're going to go inward spiritually, inward means something deeper than your narrative. That's what it's spiritually. That's kind of the main thing. Something deeper than whatever our narrative of how worthy or unworthy or good or bad or right or wrong, or whether the world's going to end tomorrow or go on forever, or, it just goes on and on and on. The amount of intellectualizing we can do. And all this kind of tends to keep us out of the present moment. or it tends to also distort our idea of what the present moment is so much that it doesn't really reflect what the present moment really is. Remember being out on a walk with somebody in the woods. They're kind of going on and on about, you know, how terrible everything's become in life and da-da-da-da-da-da. And of course, there's plenty of terrible stuff happening in the world. There always has been, by the way. We got our version of it. And just going on and on about how terrible everything was. And I started to get this feeling. I don't know if you've ever had this feeling, but sometimes when somebody's doing it, I have this feeling like I'm caught. They're dreaming. They're awake, but they're dreaming, and they're interacting with me, and I'm kind of in their little narrative dream about, you know, this whole thing. God, it's just so this and this and this and this and this. And I remember being on this walk with this person, and you know, sometimes you want to be there and compassionate, but this was kind of one of those over the top, just sort of kvetching, complaining, just, you know. And honestly, I kind of have a limited tolerance for anybody that just wants to blow off steam around me. I have some tolerance, but it's limited. And at some point, I just said, God, look at that pine tree. And we just happened to be walking past this immense, majestic, you know, 80, 100-foot tall pine tree. And it was kind of like, and the other person I was walking with, it was kind of like, oh yeah, that's a big pine tree. And they immediately they could tell they never came out of their narrative. And I said, let's stop. Look at the pine tree. What? Look at it. They turned and they looked at me. Oh my God, that thing's enormous. And wow, you see how thick the bark is. And we're starting to talk about the tree, and you see the land, and oh, the tree went into the ground, and there's this little creek over here, and all of that. Now we're talking about the moment, where we actually are, where we really are, right? Where our feet really are, where we're actually standing, with what's actually happening for the two of us in that actual moment. And fortunately, there was a nice tree there, and I just said, look at this tree, and kept pointing, like, you know, until all of a sudden, like, the trance broke, and you could feel the energy shift. Boom, the trance breaks. Oh, okay, now we're not talking about yesterday's gripe, which a little bit of griping's okay with me. I can do that, but, you know, as a basic approach to life, it's not a very workable one. And then all of a sudden, we're noticing we're in this beautiful environment. And we're talking about that environment. And that doesn't mean that any of the world's problems were solved, or whatever was going on in this person's life just mysteriously disappeared or whatever. But there was such a like night and day transition, like snapping your fingers from complete immersion in narrative to being outside of narrative. And realizing, my God, there's this whole other world. A world that can be completely missed, but only entirely when we're just walking around our whole lives thinking that narrative is the most important thing going on, or that it's even very important at all. You notice I didn't say, as long as we have a narrative going on. It's not so much that the goal is to get your mind to where it never produces any kind of thoughts, or never even comes up with a narrative. It's nice when it comes up with way less. But that's not necessary. That's not what we should be attempting. What we should be attempting is to simply become less attached to our narrative. Just less attached. Less attached if it's there in your mind, less attached if it disappears. If it's there, okay, that's my narrative. There it is, blah, 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 blah. I heard myself say these same words 100 times. I'm getting a little tired of hearing myself, but apparently there it goes. But you know, oh, there is my automatic pilot. It just got activated, right? Somebody pushed the right button and there it went, right? It's saying the same things it says every time somebody pushes that button, you know? And at that, then we're not really in the present moment, we're in the narrative moment. But as soon as we notice, oh, I'm caught, that's the narrative. Oh, and don't make it right, and don't make it wrong, and don't feel crappy about it, or wonder, you know, all that's kind of wasted emotion. Just see it for what it is. It's just narrative. It's not good or bad. It doesn't make you bad because you thought those thoughts. Those thoughts just came to your mind, probably didn't even intend them. Okay, so I hope maybe now we're a bit more in the moment, my friends. Yeah. Okay, here's one that was sent in to me through some intention of going as deep as possible. Interesting intention, huh? To go as deep as possible. Being as honest as possible and non-resistant as possible. Those are some powerful intentions. To go as deep as possible, to be as honest as possible, and to be as non-resistant as possible. I found myself in silence, in emptiness. It was not what I expected. There was no bliss, pleasure, insight. There was no juice for the mind, for the me. It was not a space that the me would necessarily want to return to. Absolutely nothing there for it. Funny enough, though, the me is already there, though, just in constant distraction from it. It is such a simple, and in some ways such a subtle shift, sort of like when you hear words. The mind hears and constructs the ideas from the language, but hearing from this shift or space, there is also hearing the actual sounds and the space between the sounds of the words. Do you get what's being said here? This is a kind of being present. Yes, we can be present. I'm listening to the words. Yes, okay, I think I'm being as present as I can be. But this is a different kind of presence. This is a present. There is also hearing the actual sounds and the space between the sounds of the words. That's a different kind of being present. It's seeing that absolutely everything happens in this silence, space, emptiness. There's no choice. Everything comes and goes in it. Seemingly no phenomena can stay stagnant within it. This turns everything on its head. All thoughts, ideas, feelings, answers, questions, all possible phenomena happening in it, nothing excluded. Even recent self-inquiry, identification, non-identification, all happening within it. It used to seem space, silence, emptiness happened within me. But what seems much more true now is that I, along with everything else, is happening in it. Can it be this plain and simple, utterly simple? Can it be that this is what so many pointers are pointing at? I read this not so much because I'm interested in what I would say about it. There's not really much that needs to be said, except, yes, this is it, but I'm really hesitant to say that because when I say that, I know for so many people there's a fixed thing. Like, okay, now I got it, and they just stop being really as open as they were because I got it. That's like the ego's, I got it, okay, and I just said I've got it, and maybe they did. Well, that doesn't mean you'll retain it, especially if you, as an ego, think you got it. But there is a way in which we need a kind of positive, a kind of affirmation, a kind of like, yes, like, you know, like I'm doing here. Yes, that's it. That sounds authentic to me, right? So in that sense, yes. But a qualified yes in the sense of don't put a period at the end of the yes, ever. There's always more to see. There's always more to see. When things first open up for us, we got our foot in the door of reality. That's what my teacher used to say. You got your foot in the door. Good for you. Doesn't really know what's in the room or how many rooms there are or anything about it, but you got your foot in the door. That's your awakening. I loved and hated that when she would say that. I loved it because I knew that it was true. And it's also kind of like, oh, there's more to this, huh? Oh, wow. And it's not more in the sense of seeking and chasing and all that. It's not that at all. But, good Lord, reality is so immense. You think you're going to just all contain it in one little day? So anyway, so I wanted to give this sense of what it is to be present. So yes, there's something that seems quite authentic about this, and it's wonderful. It's lovely, but I really liked just the descriptions of I used to listen to the words, and now I'm listening to the sound of the words and the space between the words. The way someone says something is about as important as what they actually say. If you know how to listen to the way they say it. Not just what they're saying, but the way they say it. Here's another question. Dear Roger, I recently discovered your meditation online course. Thank you for that. I feel I finally have the guidance I need. I have one question that keeps coming up during practice. As I relax my attention and trace my way back to its source, it often gets stuck with the sensation of the body, and specifically the sensation of the face, its bone structure, the jaws. I know intellectually I'm not this sensation. However, there is something deeper in me that seems to hold on to this sensation. How do I disidentify from this sensation a deeper level than merely an intellectual one? I'm gonna murder this name. I'm sorry. A preemptive apology, but I'm gonna try. Ghislaine, Ghislain. Ghislaine. I'm sure I got that name wrong, but I love the look of it when I look at it. And I tried the best I could. So thank you for writing this question. It's an interesting question. It's one of those things on the face of it. Somebody could go I'm relaxing my attention and it gets stuck with sensation in the body. And okay, I get that. The sensation of the face, its bone structure, the jaw. You go, why would it get hung up on the face and bone structure? Well, there's a really good reason it would do that, by the way. But it's an interesting thing to know, or just to wonder, because it's not a thing that you hear all the time, right? So when we're doing this, this guidance, right, and going back to the source, right? Back to the source is basically also a version of going back to what you really, really, really are. And we go back almost why this process of elimination, right? There's a thought there. Well, that thought's not always there. There was a time that thought wasn't there, so that thought comes and goes. In fact, they all seem to come and go. So the thought stream can't be me because I seem to be here, whether the thoughts are here or not here, whether a particular kind of thought is here or not, whether it's a nice, good thought or a really ugly, awful thought. It seems like I seem to be deeper than just the thoughts. Okay, I can't be defined by the thoughts in my head. By God, if most people just took that really deeply, that would revolutionize anybody's life that took it literally deeply enough. You are not the thoughts in your head. Whew, that's gonna change someone's life if they contemplate that long enough and deeply enough. But we can go then the thoughts, emotions, the same. Those are coming and going. There's something seemingly, subjectively watching all this stuff. So where's the thoughts, feelings, then we get down to sensations. Those come and go too. Now where's the real I? But now we're really kind of tracing this source of oneself. But the ego, the ego version of ourself has a lot to do with our face. At the very kind of the underlying energetic of an ego is sort of a persistent kind of subtle, sometimes very overt, but more often subtle underlying continuous tension, physical tension. The ego produces this kind of tension. And specifically behind the eyes, in here, sometimes in the mouth, this whole region, is because if you ask most people in the West, where does your self reside, they'll point here. In some other parts of the world, they'll point here, because they have a different place of where they feel like reside. Other parts will, but in the West, we predominantly think we reside here. And that's where our ego's in. And the ego, if you really look just deeper than the thoughts and even the narrative, it's sort of this tension, literally, throughout the body mind. It's like most of the time it's quite subtle, and it's specifically in the face. And so, when we're tracking, who am I? Thoughts come and go, and feelings come and go, and this comes and go, and that comes and go. And pretty soon, everything we've ever identified with, we see that it's something that's ephemeral, right? Or that there's something almost as if it were metaphorically sort of behind it, watching it. If there's a thought, what's noticing the thought? If there's a feeling coming up, what's noticing the feeling, right? So all this happens in the space of awareness, in the space of consciousness, right? That's what's... So, when you feel the sensation here, fine. See, the sensation in your eyes or anywhere else, could be your toe, but he was mentioning the ones in his face. And I think they were coming up because that's kind of where the ego structure tension resides, face, shoulders, what resides everywhere, but we really feel it here. And of course, there's those sensations, so you'll feel those, and those are the tensions, these little sensations around the eye and the jawbone and this, and you're sensing the muscular, very subtle muscular tensions that are always there, but they're so habitual that people tend to not notice them. And in this practice, sometimes you'll start to notice that subtle tension. And it can be a sticking point because you'll think it's like overly significant or you have to give it, but it's just literally, it's just another phenomena that's arising in consciousness. Okay, now there's muscular tension in the face or around the eyes. That's not who I am. That's an experience that's arising within me, of course. No denying that. But that doesn't define me, right? And so it goes. And you get to this point where the mind gets to it's perplexed. It's sort of confusion point where it's kind of disidentified with almost everything because everything's ephemeral and passing. And there is like this light of consciousness, this light of being that always seems to be there, right? And yet you can't intellectually make the leap into, oh, I guess that's what I am. You can't, you can try to do that. Plenty of people have tried to do that. Or like listen to a talk and say, Anja Shanti says I'm consciousness, I guess that's what I am, and you can try really hard to convince yourself of that. But that's not meaningful at all. Then we've just turned it into a belief. And a belief isn't going to wake you up. Questioning beliefs, that'll wake you up. But not retaining them, not grabbing hold of them. So no matter what the sensation is or where it is, it's not the innermost. That's not the resolution to the inquiry, what am I really? Right? But it gets you right to that place where the only thing that can resolve it is a kind of revelatory experience. But you can't make that happen. And so that's kind of frustrating right there, right? I can keep looking at all this stuff that I've already looked at deeply enough to know that it's not really going to define who and what I am. It's there in my psyche, but it's not telling me who I am. And I can feel there's something deeper, and yet I can't get to the deeper thing, mostly because I can't reach out and grab it. Or I can't turn around and go, oh, there's consciousness. I can see that. Like you can't see consciousness even like you can, or sense it like you can sense a thought or a feeling and go, there it is, because the thought has a location, or a feeling or a sensation has a location somewhere. Conscious awareness, where is its location? See, it doesn't have any specific location. anywhere you'd point to, you'd say, well, my consciousness is in my left shoulder. Let's say, for instance, just to have fun, it's in my left shoulder. And you could say, yes, but your consciousness is that which is noticing the left shoulder. It's not in your left shoulder. Right? That seems relatively simple, but you'd be surprised when we get it into our minds how this stuff gets a little bit confusing. Right? So when you get to that periphery, when you've done the inquiry, the sort of that does the disidentification, I'm not that, I'm not that. And then what I am, you feel like you're right there, right? Because of course you are. But you can't make that one happen intellectually. What can you do? Be fully present for that. Fully, to where we started from. Be really completely present of being right there at that. Just at that junction, you know? Yeah. And Rumi had this wonderful poem. I can't remember the actual words of the poem, but the basic idea was, you know, he'd spent his life looking for God and metaphorically knocking at this door his whole life. I think a lot of people can identify with that, whether it's God or awakening or whatever we're looking for, and they're, you know, banging away at something, their meditation, their practices, their whatever, going to 100 spiritual teachers or, you know, whatever. And in the poem of Rumi, at the end of it is his great surprise when the door opens, finally, after years and years and years of knocking. But it's not, the surprise isn't that the door opened. The surprise is that once the door opened, he noticed that he'd been knocking on it from the inside all along. And that's like the essence of the awakening experience, put in just a few words. You know, you're knocking at the sacred door, you're knocking at the door to get into heaven or awakening or whatever it is, God consciousness, and someday the door opens, you don't know why, you never know why, you don't make it happen, but you also participate in it, but the door opens for whatever reason. And the amazing thing is, yes, it's what's revealed, but it's also, wow, I was knocking from the inside. I was reality looking for reality. I wasn't me looking for reality. That was my little narrative. It was reality looking for reality. Doing its best to become conscious of itself. And hence our spiritual instinct, as I've talked a lot about over the years. So yeah, you're doing fine. Just when you get to those sensations, and just notice that's just another thing consciousness is watching. Those sensations are there. You don't have to pretend like they're not, but they're like the core of the ego structure. Actually, is that subtle tension, especially through the jawline and through the eyes. Like I said, for most people, it's very habituated. They don't notice until they get a lot of tension. You know, life gets super stressful, and they're, you know, rubbing their eyes and their jaws getting a little tight, and right? Because that's where our ego mind stores a lot. It stores tension all over the place, but that's the most transparent one. Let's see. Ooh, do I want to dive into this? Sure, we got a half an hour. Why not? I get this question so much. It seems like no matter how many times I answer it, I still get it. So, yeah. Well, before I get to that one, I just came upon this other one. I have a question that's a little straightforward. If there is no thinker of thoughts, why does it seem like I can choose to think about anything I want? It's not if there's no thinker of thoughts. If there's no thinker of thoughts, tells me there's an assumption being made, probably because it's been heard. Maybe because you've heard me say it or heard it written or something. There's no thinker of thoughts. But if you don't know that, don't take it, don't assume. Maybe there is a thinker of thoughts. Maybe there isn't. Go in open-ended. We make suggestions, or I make suggestions as a spiritual teacher, but I don't want those to become beliefs in anybody's mind. I want them to become points of investigation so you all find out for yourself. That's what's liberating, right? That's what does it. So, if there is no thinker of thoughts, I'll go along with that. I won't get caught for too long, and if there's no thinker of thoughts, let's find out. That's part of the investigation. Is there a thinker of thoughts? Is there or isn't there? Can you find one? Have you found the thinker of thoughts? Let's not go to if there's no thinker of thoughts. Is there or isn't there a thinker of thoughts? Let's deal with that first, then we can get to the second part. I absolutely agree with you. While it does seem like the I can choose to think about anything I want to. It does seem like you can think about anything you want to, right? But where do those thoughts come from? Where does the choice to think a certain thought comes from? And where did that choice come from? And when you say a sentence like I am right now, just imagine the disaster if I had to consciously choose every one of these thoughts I was speaking. I'm not consciously choosing any of them. Not even one of them. They're happening, right? They're coming out. I'm wanting to be as clear as I can be. And out of that wanting or that intention, then speaking comes out. Right, hopefully as clear as it can be. It can seem like there's an I doing all this. Just like, there can seem like an I that's in total control of its life and everything else. That might perplex just until somebody dies, and then they say, "Oh, I guess my I can't control much." The whole show can end just like that. Nothing the I can do about it. What is it really controlling? Does it control how you feel? Can it do that? Do you really control how you feel at every moment? Do you have perfect control over your feelings and your sensations and your thoughts? And you see all that? So, as I said, my suggestion, and keep this curious, right? Keep it a little bit light if you can. Don't even say if there's no thinker of thoughts. Let's just stay with that one. Is there a thinker of thoughts? There are thoughts, obviously. As Krishnamurti used to say, the thinker is the thought. The only thinker there will ever be is a thought that says there's a thinker. Outside of that, there's simply the arising of thought. That's what meditation's for. Just sit down and watch. And all sorts of thoughts will arise without your permission at all. Without your intention. In fact, with your expressed intention that they don't arise, they will continue to arise. They won't listen to you. They don't care what you or I want. They will arise or not arise on their own. Have you noticed? That's part of what meditation is for. So we notice, I don't have as much control over this thing as I thought I did. And not only does my thinking go on without me, without any intention, right? But it's not often even that intelligent. Even for really intelligent people, most of their thoughts aren't that intelligent. If you listen to their narrative, most of our narratives, that's not where we reserve our highest points of intelligence for our narratives in general. Is there a thinker of thoughts? Or is the thinker just another thought? And it's in our language. This stuff's even the way our language is constructed. If they're thoughts, our language says there has to be a thinker. If there is a verb, there has to be something or someone that verb's happening to. But that's rules of language. It's not rules of reality. My heart's beating right now. There's no heart beater in there. My lungs are breathing. There's no breather in there making sure it happens. Little guy in there going, okay, now we're going to have an in-breath. Now we're going to have an out-breath. Now we're going to beat this heart. Now we're going to think these thoughts, right? The heart just beats, lungs breathe, thoughts occur. I don't mean you can't change thoughts, right? You can see negative thoughts and you can go, oh, look at those. Maybe I don't want to be thinking so negatively all the time. Maybe I can reorient my attention to something that's not totally negative. But even that, even the intention to do that, where did that come from? Why would you have that? And, you know, let's say 1 in 1,000 people have that kind of intention. Why you? And where did it come from? Your mind came up with it, but outside of that. See, so there's a level at which this all gets quite mysterious. And I don't say mysterious to try to just brush it, you know, away with, smudge it away without explaining anything. But there is literally a kind of mysteriousness. Somebody also wrote, this was another question by Mark. He said, "Dear Al, you once gave a fantastic talk on karma and free will. This is my favorite lecture of yours and I've listened to it many times. In it, you implied that we have no choice. However, in other videos, you have stated that we do have choice when we are in contact with our present and aware being. As someone who deals with shame and guilt quite a bit, I'd love to hear you talk a bit more about this if you could. I feel like I have a choice in each moment, but sometimes afterwards, I feel regret, shame, guilt, etc. Are these feelings perhaps showing me that I made the wrong choice so that I can choose differently in the future? If I truly believe I had no choice at all, then of course there'd be no place for guilt or shame because it's not my fault. Then why dwell on it? I'm confused on this topic. Any pointers would be appreciated. Thanks, Mark." Mark, I understand. This is a tough topic for folks. This is a tough topic. Where did I put my tea? Here it is. And Mark, I'm going to do the best here in just a few minutes that I can do. But I can tell you right now, this is something that can only really be grasped like intuitively. It's not something that's going to be really satisfying on a purely rational level, although I do think it is quite rational. We're talking about different levels of being here, so let's be clear on that. Right? There's this relative level of life. And you have to answer to that all the time. You know, you go to work. Hey, what are we going to do about this and this and this? And you have to plan. You have to make decisions. You do what you do, right? In any given day. And, you know, if it doesn't really work so well, if someone says, so, Bob, what are we going to do about this thing at work here? You're the head engineer and we can't figure out how to do this. What are we going to do? You know, you can't say, well, I have no real free will about this thing. I have no choice. Tell you what, if an answer pops up, I'll let you know. But if it doesn't, I'm just going to sit around and drink coffee and see if anything good happens. Like, that wouldn't work so well if you just referred to the no choice thing, right? So this is what I found, Mark. With pretty much everything I've ever looked at really deeply. When you look at something deeply, you often end up bumping into this where things get defined in these nice, crisp dualities, right? There is free will, there is choice, or there is not. Now, when you bump into those kind of dualities, because they're everywhere, life's made out of them, right? Hot, cold, you know, whatever it is. There's made out of these interacting opposites, right? But the deeper reality is never in either one of the opposites. There's some of reality in each of an opposite, but the real reality is down where those dualities sprang from, right? Down there where they blend, and that's the hard part, Mark. The hard part is when you trace all this down where these views, let's say, no free will, because these, for me anyway, I don't know, I'm not commenting on what anybody else says about this subject, only from myself. So when I speak about it, when I try to speak about it, I try to speak from my experience, right? And my experience is when these dualities show up in almost any form, the deeper truth, the deeper resolution is going to be in something where they both have a common origin, right? So we can come into a way of perceiving, a state of consciousness, a perception, where we can see, and not only see, but feel the absolute spontaneity of everything. Everything. From every thought to your next heartbeat, everything, 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 everything. Even all the control that people think they have and exercise, that's also spontaneously arising. Everything spontaneously arising. That's a pretty wild thing to see. It's liberating in the sense of you can, as you suggested, like if you saw it a little bit more from that point of view, well, that would do away with a lot of shame and guilt. By the way, it would also do away of getting hung up on a lot of blame, right? So we can take it, how would it be for me? I wouldn't have as much shame and guilt if it wasn't all, me doing it all. But also, I wouldn't be so completely derogatory towards you because you didn't have the free will when you did that. See, so it could have a compassionate outcome if it's authentic and not an intellectual conclusion. If it's authentic, very often this is the outcome, is a kind of love, a kind of compassion, because you no longer see the world through the eyes of guilt and shame and blame. Yes, you still have to deal with the world on its terms. Ill-behaved people have to be dealt with correctly. It doesn't mean that anything goes. It doesn't mean most of what one might imagine it means. But to see it, so there's a way of perceiving where that's seen and that's seen to actually be true and real. There's also a way of being seen where we see like, wow, if we don't actually if we don't step into our own shoes, if we don't step up in our own life, if we don't occupy our own agency in life, we'll often develop this sort of attitude that everything seems to be pushing us around, and because we haven't learned to have enough agency. We haven't discovered a healthy will. We can have all the cool teachings we want, non-dual teachings about what goes beyond the doer, and even will. The experience of will to something totally, totally different. There's a different state of consciousness. But in the relative state of consciousness, right, lots of people have wounded wills, right? And a wounded will is not a transcended will. A will transcended is spiritually freeing. A wounded will is when you just you don't feel like you have the energy and the permission and the drive and the inspiration and whatever that would take to do what you want to do in life on a relative level, right? On a relative level. So the problem with this is, number one, you can't explain it on a relative level because there is a point where they all come together where it feels like everything is happening totally spontaneously. And even though there's no separate doer of it, in some ultimate sense, when we realize that we are that fundamental reality, that it's doing what it's doing it, right? And so in that sense, we're doing it. But it's not really will. It's just, it's a different, it's like sensing and feeling how the whole thing is working as a sort of whole. And that includes no free will, and it includes the experience of having will. I would never say free, having some will. Right? Free what? Free, like, are you going to exercise your will free of all your conditioning, all your psychological conditioning, all your biological conditioning? No, that's never going to happen. So from the relative standpoint, ego standpoint, really useful, right? To have a certain, not the will that's just going to, bowl over everybody and make happen what they want to happen, but enough to where you feel like you're standing on your own 2 feet. You feel like you have the permission to be, not that you need permission, but you don't need permission, but I'm talking about a feeling of being, of even of ego, sort of sufficiency in a sense. I mean, egos will always have some lack of sufficiency if you look deep enough, but on that certain level, and being able to make choices and being able to exercise their will, like that's important. That's good relative functioning stuff. And by the way, the great spiritual greats do their own version of this. Jesus wasn't a pushover, right? He had an agenda and he was pursuing that. Buddha, the same thing. He wasn't a pushover either. These were dynamic presences in the relative world, right? And they knew, they weren't hung up on these philosophical dualities, right? Because that's often what we can get hung up in the modern day, is these philosophical dualities, never going to the, and we're like battling, like which one of these is real and which one of these is true, and there's no choice and no free will, or is the people that talk about choice and free will as the key to freedom, who's right and who's wrong? So which one of the dualities is going to win out? Well, which duality ever wins out? Does hot ultimately triumph over cold? No. Does nighttime triumph over daylight? No. Temporarily, light comes back. Dualities don't win. You're not in reality if one side of a duality is what you land on. That's how I see it. So I will talk at times depending on what I want to emphasize, right? If I want to emphasize for people a healthy kind of will, a healthy kind of way of sort of being in the world, of standing up and realizing like it's okay to be who you are, right? You don't need to make 1,000 apologies to be who you are. Stand up, be who you are, be the best version of you, okay? That's all relative stuff. But hey, people are living their lives in the relative world. This is where we're existing, right? In a functional sense, it's where we're functioning. And we're also living in a non-dual world, where it's all one, where all these differences, we see right through them, and it's all the same thing, playing all these parts, right? And then I usually get emails, well, why did God play this part? And why did they play Hitler's part? As if reality is like a cosmic human being. Like there's something or someone up there making decisions and figuring, no. It's so obvious that is not the way it happens. That's what we've been told, but there's so much evidence to the contrary. It's almost laughable, but not quite, because I know some people are very heavily invested into that stuff. But so I haven't answered your question, Mark, as you can see, because I don't think it can be answered really in words in terms of this or that. Sometimes I'll be going the real non-dual thing, and that's what I'll be trying to evoke in people in my audience. And then other times I'll be trying to evoke something different, because I'm not really talking about the non-dual. I might be back on the relative level. I might have a room where half the people I can sense have had some spiritual awakening, but they're still floating 2 or 3 feet off the ground. I'm going to give them a real relative talk when I sense that in the room. They don't like it, because they want to be floating as long as they can, like not land on earth as long as possible. But I don't really care. If I think that's what they need, I'll talk relative. I'll do that. It's just medicine to me. It's just medicine. Reality is just like when our misperceptions just sort of come they just fall. We just come into this cohesive whole. And in that whole, there's all these individuals. You're one of them. I'm one of them. As a human being, right? Everything we see around us. When it is time, when life calls you to exercise something that feels like your will, fine, exercise it. When life calls it to you, not necessarily when your ego wants to bulldoze through something, but when life calls it, you know? Spirituality, you know, all this, the transcendence that we do, and it's necessary, it's kind of part of how we wake up. But you got to be careful too. Because we can just go from one extreme to the other. We can be super caught in the relative world, and then we can just get super caught in the non-relative world, the non-dual world. And I've seen people super caught in the non-dual world. They're not very functional. They're not even after a while, after their bliss wears out, once their lifestyle starts to fall apart because they're not dealing with the relative world, they're not even particularly happy anymore. They may be happy when they can go sit in the forest all by themselves, but when they got to deal with life, then they're not happy anymore, right? So because these extremes that we human beings, you know, from relative, and then we get something that seems really heavenly, well, we're going to want to grab onto that 9 times out of 10, aren't we? So be on the lookout for this way that our minds grasp for dualities, or wants to know which one's the true one, which one's the right one. It's almost like a spiritual teaching. Well, what's the ultimate spiritual teaching? It's like asking a doctor, what's the ultimate medicine? There isn't a medicine. What do you got? What's your problem? I'll tell you the best medicine that I know of for your problem, but there's no ultimate medicine for everything. Spirituality is the same way. Buddha was kind of known as like a spiritual doctor. Right? He prescribed the human conditions, and then he came up with these prescriptions for the human conditions. These prescriptions are still very valid, very powerful. They're also very old. We have to adapt them, but nonetheless. So, you'll see, if you don't get too caught in your head, if you can come down more into your body, you'll feel when life is asking you, when it needs you to stand up, it needs you to exercise that kind of inspired energy or will energy, then fine, you can do that. And when it's more obvious that that's to do that is just not what the moment calls for, then you do that. But see, you can't make just an intellectual standard around it. It's an intuitive thing. Always it comes back to our ability to be present. How present can we be? Because our ability to be present is what unlocks like all the other practices, all the other insights, everything. Depends on how present am I. And following that direct experience. So in my direct experience, it will not allow me to land on either there's absolutely no free will at all, or there's total free will. Neither one of those fits my experience. I've visited states of perception and consciousness when either one of those can seem totally true. But I know, because I've experienced a lot of different states of consciousness, and I know they have their own view of things. Each one of them almost has their own worldview, and some of them seem totally complete. But the only complete thing is when we're not grasping onto anything. We're not insisting that life fit into the boxes we try to put it into, intellectual boxes, the conceptual boxes. Then and only then do we start to get access to that other order of wisdom. In Zen they call it prajna. It's that order of wisdom that's in everybody. It's in you. It's a wisdom that is gifted to us. Right? It's like an insight. That's prajna. That's a moment of prajna. And when we have an insight, it feels like a gift. Like, aha, that's an insight. If it's intellectual, we might reason ourselves like, dun, 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 dun. Oh, okay, it's kind of what you expected because you reasoned all the way along. And that's an important thing to do in lots of other areas of life. In this particular area, it doesn't quite work because we're going to something deeper than just rational kinds of wisdom. We're going to prajna, a kind of unitive kind of wisdom. And again, that depends on our ability and our willingness to be present. And we really do, and when we get into this work, especially if you're getting the kind of teaching that I does, I mean, there's all sorts of kinds of spiritual teachings and religions and stuff, but in this kind of teaching, you really do need to know what you want. With any teaching, you need to know what you want, so that what you want matches the teaching. Teaching isn't going to match your want. I'm not going to conform my teaching to match anybody's wants, but I will kind of mold it to meet someone's their inspiration, right? Their calling. Let's see if I have any more. We have a couple minutes. Okay. Let's do this one. Dear Adya, could you please explain what is the meaning of silent teaching by the presence, capital P? Is it dependent on space, time, form, or independent? For example, does the disciple have to be in the presence of the teacher for the silent teaching? What recognitions make a disciple have the ability to understand the silent teaching? Another one of those tricky ones for me as a teacher. It's tricky because there is a silent teaching, and it does have to do a lot with presence and silence. But it's tricky as a teacher because as soon as you say that, then people tend to start to groove on the presence of the teacher, and that's really just not a great orientation. I mean, if you can feel it, fine, but you don't want to be trying to mine it for gold. A lot of people do. It's not going to get them anywhere. So that's my hesitation. I don't want too much focus to be on us teachers and that kind of thing. And yet I can't deny that there is kind of this silent kind of teaching. Now, I don't know what anybody else means about, the silent teaching. So where the question comes, how many other definitions of silent teaching you might have in your mind, I don't know that. So all I'm talking about is mine and not addressing what anybody else means because I don't know what they mean. But what I would mean, well, let me put it a kind of traditional way it was put in Zen. In Zen, the whole core of it is called mind-to-mind transmission from teacher to student outside of words and scriptures. A direct transmission of truth, mind to mind, outside of words and scriptures. That's one of the ancient definitions of Zen. So right there in the ancient definition, right? There's a mind-to-mind transmission. What does that mean, though? What does that actually mean? It doesn't mean that something's given one to another. I can't give you your true nature. That's great news, because if somebody could, they could take it away. And they can't. And nobody can give it to you either. So anybody that suggests that they can give you your true nature, run as fast as you can put your shoes on. However, there is a kind of way that, of course, this, again, going back to this ability to be very present and quiet, there's a way in which the teacher and the student can be drawing almost upon the same state of consciousness. So, just give an example of this. I've had people tell this to me quite a few times over the years. I'll give a talk, let's say, and I've had someone come up, and it's always when they're in an unusual state of receptivity that people tend to have this experience. They come up and they'll say, number one, your talk, I felt like I was giving the talk, like every word that you were saying was like a word that was in my own mind. It was almost weird. It was like I was giving the talk, but it was coming out of your mouth. And some version of that I've heard many times. And that's when, whether the student, let's just call somebody in the audience, the student, and the teacher are on this in the same mind stream. They're sharing the same mind stream. And you'll feel that, right? You'll feel, God, it's coming out of that person's mouth, and yet it feels like I'm the one that's coming up with the words inside of your being. There's 1,000 versions of silent presence. This is just one of them. But all of a sudden it feels like someone's speaking your wisdom, right? And that's when we've joined a kind of mind space with a teacher. And when we touch that, when we're both in that mind state, then we can have some corresponding experience to some of the things that the person who's actually in that mind state is in, or state of consciousness, right? And so we can kind of participate in that. It's not the same as giving it to somebody, but they can kind of participate. When you're participating in it, then something kind of happens. I call it resonance rather than transmission, because transmission gives the implication of something being transmitted from the other, where resonance is like you're in the same mind stream, and you think of it as like, if I have a guitar in my hand and I strum the D string, and there's a guitar on the other side of the room just sitting there and nobody's holding it and nobody's strumming the string. If I strum the D string and you go and you put your ear to the wooden body of that guitar, you'll hear that string, that note will be vibrating in that guitar. That's the resonance, right? So it wasn't like that guitar borrowed the string from this one, or the sound, or it stole it. It wasn't. This string vibrated, and so that the same note on that guitar started to vibrate. Before this one was vibrating, it was just there dormant. And now it vibrates. And now they're both vibrating. And then they get on the kind of the same wavelength. And you're participating in that mind stream. Now, that's a nice thing, because you can have some insights and understandings and experiences that are that can be profound and helpful. The other side of that is that you can become quite attached to that. And you can be very attached to trying to enter into the mind stream of the teacher and all that. And then this thing that when it happens spontaneously can be so beneficial, but when we then do it intentionally and then we want something from it, it all gets a little bit of ego orientation in it. And then you're going and trying to join the mind stream of teachers around, and you're whatever, again, it becomes another version of it's out there. That's the danger of me even speaking about this. I don't want to, as you all know, I don't like encouraging out there-ness, that this stuff is outside of you. And yet, I can't deny also that there's not this joining in a similar mind stream. And that's just not a spiritual teacher, by the way, thing. This is the kind of crap that happens in cults, too. You can get a charismatic cult leader and start to join in their nonsense, and pretty soon you're willing to do utter nonsense, right? Or it can happen in political environments. So it's not, I want to take it out of this like overly esoteric thing, because it's not. Look at a group of, a crowd of people, the state they used to go in Germany when Adolf Hitler was giving a talk. They would enter into a similar mind state. They'd go bananas. But it was pure delusional bullshit. Right? So, you got to be a little careful. Got to be careful whose mind stream you're opening to, number one. But also, don't make that the focus. Don't make that the focus. If it happens, great, it happens. But listen, the teacher can be anything. The teacher can be a rock. It can be a dog that walks by you. It can be a child that says something that's, wise beyond their years. The teaching can come at anywhere, at any time. And the teacher can show up at any time in under any guise. Part of being a good student is recognizing the teacher and the teaching when it arrives in your life. And almost anything can take the form of the teaching and the teacher. So let's not forget that too, because that's probably the most transformative thing when we start to look at things for what they can, or what they are trying to show us. Not only what they can show us, but often what they seem to be trying to show us. Well, I think last time I ended early, and tonight only 5 minutes late. Not too bad. I hope not anyway. Thank all of you for your questions. I have way more questions than I can address. I probably brought, 8 or 9 here. I probably read, 50, 60. But thank you for sending in the questions, and nice to share this space together, my friends. Nice to share a little bit of time, and a little presence. So let's just take time to keep listening. That's where all these talks came from. 27 years of them and counting. And they all came from the quietest spaces inside. It's amazing what's there. It seems like nothing. But then it opens up. Namaste, my friends. Be well.